All right, welcome back to the channel. Must do this video. Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao. Floyd disses. Man, I need to know what the new slang is for disses, because that sounds very 1990s. He slams, he blasts, he chastises Manny Pacquiao, because Manny Pacquiao has to fight, but Floyd Mayweather Jr. only fights if he wants to fight. Let's talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr., Manny Pacquiao, and what Floyd had to say, because truthfully, I think they both have had better careers than the other one has. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So we are going to do a Floyd Mayweather Jr. Manny Pacquiao video. Yes, we are. There's not a lot of news flying around in the sport of boxing, and this is a conversation that we've been having for several years, but we might as well just push it a little bit further, because it seems to me that the likelihood of Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Manny Pacquiao actually fighting in a boxing ring should be huge. They should do that trilogy, absolutely, positively. Please do it, okay? Now, Floyd Mayweather, and I'll tell you why I think they should do it. They must do it a little bit longer in the video, so make sure that you tune in to the end. But let me do just a little bit of background and get through it, what leads to this discussion. Floyd Mayweather Jr. has been, is a great fighter, man. Great fighter. One of my favorite fighters ever. You know, it's tough for me sometimes to, because, you know, Floyd is so public after his career ended, and, you know, hindsight is 2020. So when you look back at Floyd Mayweather's career, or you listen to what he says outside the ring, sometimes it irritates me. And so depending on the day, I can come off real pro Mayweather. I can come off real, you know, screw Floyd Mayweather, right? Just depending on the topic and depending on what bounced out of Floyd Mayweather's head, right? Now, there's some obvious things about Floyd Mayweather as it relates to his nemesis, Manny Pacquiao. Now, Floyd, and obviously Manny Pacquiao is Floyd's nemesis, and by that I mean he is the guy that when Floyd was really shining, tearing up the sport of boxing, dude, making killer money, winning big fights, right? Because he did win. We talk about later on in his career how he did some cherry picking or had some select opponents. But in the early part of his fights, in the early part of his career, he won big fights. That stuff was not make-believe, right? The Gennaro Hernandez, the Angel Man Freddy, the Diego Corrales, Jose Luis Castillo, Ricky Hatton, all of those guys, you know, those fights that he had, many people going into those early fights thought he was going to lose them. Many of them wanted him to lose, but, you know, he gets through them, and then he has a career that is an excellent career. But Manny Pacquiao, right when Floyd Mayweather Jr. gets to the peak of boxing, right, which is after he beats both Arturo Gatti, right? Because by beating Arturo Gatti, he got his first payday. And then the payday did well enough to get the attention of Oscar De La Hoya. He was like, oh, I can make some money fighting this dude. And he's a little dude. So Oscar De La Hoya, in the later part of his career, fights Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather Jr. beats him. And then Floyd Mayweather Jr. becomes the biggest thing in boxing. But, you know, people don't like to have American fighters look like they're the best in the world for too long. So out comes, people pull Manny Pacquiao right out their backside. Boop, right? Manny Pacquiao is the best. Manny Pacquiao is the best. Now, Manny Pacquiao is beating guys, right, that, you know, he had a good early part of his career, loses by knockout a couple times, but so really he should just be fooled. Nope. He comes to the United States, and he fights, as I think he might even have been a replacement fight, comes to the United States, wins a belt in spectacular fashion. And then when he's with Marat Muhammad, right? Marat Muhammad brings him to the United States. He becomes this, you know, he gets this really big win. So then he And I think, who did he go the distance with? He might have went the distance with, it was before the Diaz fight that he winds up going the distance. And Freddie Roach throws a fit at Murat Muhammad and says, these gloves, these gloves, it's these big pillows you have on the hand. So he switches from being promoted. That's the last time he's promoted by Murat Muhammad. And he goes to Top Rank. And all of a sudden, he doesn't have his glove problems anymore. I don't know if y'all remember, like, I'm drawing a parallel with Tyson Fury and his gloves and, God, what is his name? Who else? Luis Resto with his gloves and Margarito with his gloves. You know, it's pretty funny that Top Rank always got a lot of problems with people. Their fighters got a lot of problems with gloves. But anyway, so that becomes his nemesis, right? And to Manny Pacquiao's credit, Manny Pacquiao is an excellent fighter, right? He's no joke. He really is, I think, everything that they said that he was. Now, when he starts flying up weight classes and winning in multiple weight classes, I know that there are people that think some of that stuff was caused by performance-enhancing drugs, and I don't think that it is completely out of the question that it was. But regardless, you know, he gets up there, and he's had a career that is outstanding, right? You have championships in major championships in 7 divisions, not 8, 7, because Ricky Hatton was for the IBO. That's not a major championship belt, but 7 is nothing to sneeze on. The biggest thing for me is that the dude was a world champion in 4 different decades. From the decade of 1990 to 1990 to, God, how do you do the 10 years? The 1990s, the 2000 to 2010, the 2011 to 2020, and the fact that he has one now makes 4 decades. That's an exceptional deal. That said, so we look at their careers, and guys like Bernard Hopkins says, "Oh, I would rather have Manny Pacquiao's career." Somebody else said they would rather have Manny Pacquiao's career. Max Kellerman says that he thinks, despite the fact that Floyd Mayweather Jr. won the fight against Manny Pacquiao, that Manny Pacquiao is the fighter of the decade and fighter of the century. Just shit that you would just say is, like, man, get out of here. But in Manny's defense, I'll say this, that Manny Pacquiao did everything he could possibly do to be measured up there equally to Floyd Mayweather Jr. But Floyd Mayweather Jr. had the better career inside the ring. He never lost. He beat Manny Pacquiao. If it's prize fighting and your purpose is to earn money, he did more of that. He also, without Manny Pacquiao, without Floyd Mayweather Jr., there might not have been a big Manny Pacquiao career. So even the opportunities that Manny Pacquiao got and the accolades associated with Manny Pacquiao were downstream from Floyd Mayweather Jr. also. But Manny Pacquiao, as far as his longevity and his ability and the fact that he has decided to continue to fight and grow his legacy aside from Floyd Mayweather, is something that should absolutely be commended. Now, the resolution of this situation should be a fight between the two of them. And if we're going to be making, this is my point, if we're going to be making these ridiculous fights in boxing between Floyd Mayweather Jr. and some Japanese dude that he's going to beat up, right? Or the last guy that he beat up. Or if you're going to see Roy Jones Jr. versus Mike Tyson, that's the real fight that stands out like crazy to me. Like, because that's just a flat out exhibition with big boxing gloves, helmets, and not helmets, headgear and everything on. Look, if we're gonna not focus on real boxing, to focus on freak shows, side shows, and things like that, then hey man, let's get a truly entertaining freak show sideshow. Let's get the 44-year-old Floyd Mayweather Jr., who's still in something resembling competitive shape, in there with Manny Pacquiao, who is a world champion, and let them fight. Because that is a fight that is past its prime for sure, but it ain't nowhere near as past its prime as Roy Jones Jr. versus Mike Tyson. And the fight between the two will actually be a real boxing match. But see, that would be too much like right. We're going to get the milking by Floyd Mayweather Jr. and we're going to get some milking from Manny Pacquiao. If we don't, because I have a suspicion, man, that we might have already seen the last of Manny Pacquiao, because I can't see when Manny Pacquiao is going to come back. Like, it'll be interesting to see how that pops off, because, you know, Fox's lineup is coming pretty soon, but, you know, I think the Fox's lineup might be people that are in the United States, where Manny Pacquiao's in the Philippines, but it's going to be tough. So, you know, at the end of the day, Floyd Mayweather saying that, you know, Manny Pacquiao fights because he has to fight, you know, maybe, you know, but guess what? It ain't going to take too many fights for him to make his money, especially if people are putting $30 million or $50 million in fees behind between a Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson fight. But it's amazing too, isn't it? How fighters like Roy Jones Jr., who was disrespected pretty widely, similar to the American fighters of today, right, can now when he ain't where he's nowhere near being even a competitive fighter, how interested people are in promoting his fights now, more so than they were interested in celebrating him when he was actually fighting. Anyway, it is what it is. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.